everyone. The time is 5:01 p.m. and the Belton Independent School District Board of Trustees are now convening a workshop on Monday, August 18, 2025. A quorum of board members is present. This meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. First item on the agenda is public comments. Becca, do we have any? No public comments. Okay. Moving on to the board workshop. Budget overview, Dr. Kelvin.
Yes, thank you, board, for being here this evening. As I was reflecting on this evening, the conversation around preparing for the 25-26 budget actually started in January, February time period of 2024. And so if you recall, you helped commission a budget advisory committee in August of 2024. And thanks to you, we started working with a committee representing citizens from our community, as well as staff and students, as well as working with our board in ultimately adopting budget assumptions in February of 25. And so tonight is an opportunity for Melissa to go into detail on all of that work, the culminating effect of all of that work. She's going to talk about the ending of 24-25, the budget assumptions for 25-26, and then look at proposed tax rate and as well as school nutrition budget and debt service budget. And so I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, and thank y'all so much for engaging in this conversation tonight.
All right. Good evening, everybody. This is our final budget workshop for the 25-26 school year. The first thing we're going to do is look at our 24-25 year, that final amended budget, and then what we think we're going to come in and actual for revenues and expenditures. And then we'll start reviewing the 25-26 proposed budgets for tonight. All right, for 24-25, we'll work from the left, work our way right. Our original budget for the general fund budget, we were anticipating a $8,156,903 deficit budget. For our final amendment, number 11, we are anticipating a $7 million deficit budget. And what we've done here is we've kind of beefed up the expenditures a little bit and the revenues in anticipation of those year-end adjustments and things that we have to record to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So there's some things that we have to book at year-end, and I'm trying to take those into account in this final budget amendment. Those are difficult to budget up front because a lot of times you really don't know what that is until you get, 3/4 through your year when TRS is giving you the Medicare Part D portion of that allocation, and so there's a lot of unknowns for that year end. So that's why our expenditures and revenues are increasing for this final amendment. Again, we're leaving a little bit of wiggle room in those expenditures. We don't want to amend those too far down because by law we're not supposed to go over by a function level for an expenditure, and so we try to leave that somewhat, give us a little wiggle room because we never know what's going to hit at year end and come in during the audit process. So final amendment number 11, which is in your consent agenda tonight, will show $144 million in revenue and $153 million in expenditures for a deficit of $7 million. And there I've kind of given you some of the big items that are increasing those revenues and expenditures. The biggest expenditure that's affecting that amendment is going to be the accrual of the salaries for those teachers that came back in August and worked nearly an entire month. However, they don't get paid until September, so we have to recognize those weeks that they worked in their new contract under the House Bill 2 raise. And so that's the biggest significant increase to that expenditure is the accrual of those salaries that will be paid in September. There's also an offset from last year's raise, which was 1%, but in relation to House Bill 2, it's insignificant, and so we're having to beef that up a little bit. The rest of that is some TRS on behalf adjustments that we have to make, and some of those GASB, the leases and the subscription-based technology items that we have to capitalize. A lot of those will have a revenue offset as well as an expenditure. And then we're moving, you can see the 6500s are increasing. And what we do there is for those departments that have subscription-based technology type items that we are capitalizing, those are coming into the 6500 out of their 6300 in their budget. So it's just a reclass in the budget. At the end of July, I ran a projection. Always like to do that to kind of see where I think we're going to be. And you can see there that it's outlined the projected actual. I'm anticipating we'll see about a $5.5 million deficit when it's all said and done. And if all that works out, fund balance will be sitting at $30,816,712, and we'll be hovering right at that 20% of fund balance. Any questions in regards to 24-25? All right, moving on. All right, so we always start with initial assumptions when we start budgeting in January and February. And then you can see where we ended for final assumptions. Average daily attendance, we're being a little more aggressive in that final percentage at 93%. And then property values are actually decreasing 3% from the previous year, and that is due to the increase in the homestead exemption to the $140,000. The 8% initially was at the $100,000 homestead exemption. And then staff pay increase, you can see it was a to be determined until we could figure out what they were going to do legislatively. And now we are basically giving a raise for House Bill 2, which is $2,500 for teachers with 3 to 4 years of experience, $5,000 for those teachers with 5 years and above, a 1% pay increase for the non-teaching staff, and then 50 cent per hour raise for the auxiliary and paraprofessional staff. Everything else not really changing. The tax rate down below would be our voter-approved tax rate. You can see that the M&O rate is pretty much the same rate that we had for the 24-25 year, and then we've lowered that INS rate to 36.25 cents. All right, impact to the general fund. Student growth, we're basically assuming very little growth. In fact, it's a negative 0.8%, nearly 1% growth in student enrollment. We just talked about the taxable value decrease. Of course, that means we'll collect less tax collections, and then the state has to make up that difference for our funding. Basic allotment increased $55, and they're pulling that funding from the guaranteed yield to make that happen to $6,215. Our House Bill 2 funding increase is approximately $7.5 million as we know it today. We'll know more as they build out the formulas in the templates. And by the end of the year, we'll have a better number as far as what that increase was. But right now, it's anticipated at $7.5 million, and $4.6 million of that is going to be salaries and benefit increases for our staff. Right now, our general fund is assuming that federal funding loss that we've been talking about for our title funding. And right now, that's built into the general fund expenditures. Once we get an approved NOGA, or a Notice of Grant Award, then we will amend the general fund back down once we get the grant awards. And then you can see there for 24-25 and 25-26, we've decreased about $12.4 million overall. All right, one of the budgets that we're going to ask you to approve tonight is the accelerated instruction. And then So Texas Education Code requires school districts to provide accelerated instruction in the applicable subject area each time a student fails to perform satisfactorily on an assessment instrument. And so we've budgeted some funds out of our compensatory education funds for that very purpose, and personnel and instructional materials, and primarily it's going to be software subscriptions and instructional resources. All right, our proposed tax rate for the 25-26 year, we are proposing an M&O tax rate of 0.7552, which is basically the same rate we have for 24-25. Then additional 3.17 pennies for disaster pennies, and for a total M&O rate of 78.69 cents. An INS rate of 36.25 for a total tax rate of 1.1494. Basically the same rate we adopted for the 24-25 school year. Back in early June, I believe, TASB notified us that we had about $3.9 million in storm damages in our roofs and HVAC systems. And so we've made the decision to try to go out to get some disaster pennies to help cover some of the costs that we're going to incur for those storm damages. And so under tax code section 26042E, that allows us to adopt a tax rate that exceeds, that you can see there in the other box, our voter approval tax rate of the 1.1177 for 25-26, without having to do a voter approval tax rate election under tax code 2608. We can only do that for 1 year, and then after that we go back to our voter approval tax rate. Is there any questions or any discussions?
Yeah, I have a question on that 3.9 million in storm damages. With the insurance that we have through TASB, isn't it a $1 million deductible?
Yes, so we had a $1 million deductible for that year. That's correct.
But with the storm damages and the money that we're seeking, we're actually seeking over the $1 million.
Yes, and I know that our transportation building had a lot of flooding from the roof, and we got to do a lot of repairs in regards to it.
That's all.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just would make the point on the slide that we also brought down our INS rate a little bit with, was it about 1.1 or something like that cents below what we could have theoretically levied. And we're using some of our INS fund balance to lower that rate in order to keep, at least maintain the same top line tax rate for our taxpayers. So I know that's, the taxes may go up or down based on your own appraisals and all that stuff, but that was a goal that Melissa worked very hard to get us to, so that we could bring that in and not have these disaster payments result in a
Tax
actual
rate.
rate increase. Would still be a tax increase.
Right, and you see that in voter approval tax rate in the box to your right. If you look at the INS portion and follow that over to the right, you see that intentional reduction on the INS side to do just what Brandon said, to allow us to keep a tax rate that is exactly what the tax rate was this past year.
So we're increasing on the M&O for the 3.17 and decreasing on the
Decreasing.
INS. Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say thank you to Melissa, thank you to Brandon, right? I mean, there's a lot of work has gone into trying to keep this rate consistent, right? And even though we're going after the disaster pennies, being able to keep that rate from going up, I mean, a lot of creativity, a lot of thought, many hours on the phone. Thank you both so much for all the work to make that happen. So.
Okay. And then there's always the no new revenue rate. So Truth in Taxation requires us to calculate what's called the no new revenue rate. This is an effective rate that would generate the same amount of tax collections if it was applied to the same properties in both the current and prior year. Okay, this is collections only. It does not look at state revenue at all. All right? So, however, there's a long calculation that the comptroller has us do in a worksheet, and thank you, the appraisal district, for helping us with those values. And that gets us to our voter approval tax rate and our no new revenue rate. And you can see there the no new revenue tax rate is $1.03.16. In comparison to, and I went ahead and highlighted, you can see there the voter approval tax rate is $1.11.77. But with the disaster pennies, that would give us a total tax rate of the 1.1494. Both of those exceed the no new revenue rate, and so that no new, when that happens, that drives statutorily the motion language and the resolution language on how that gets adopted. Basically, we have to recognize the increase in tax rate, which will be in our motion language for tonight.
Yeah, it would be great if we had a no new unfunded mandate rate and all the other things, right? It's like, I mean, this is, I know we have to publicize this number, right? But there's so much that comes on top. It's honestly, it's meaningless with all the additional things that have to happen from one year to the next.
Right, yeah. It's hard to compare one year to the previous year. I did calculate if we were to adopt the $3.16. That would basically essentially force us to go to almost a 67-cent M&O rate, and we would lose potentially $10.7 million in funding if we were to adopt that no new revenue rate. And that's about as good as a template can get that, because it's not really built for a no new revenue rate.
It's hard, and these rates make, I mean, being in other local governments, make a lot of sense how the no new revenue rate works for your city or your county or even your community college, because there's no state companion to that. There's no basic allotment. What your taxes are your taxes. And so, I'm not going to say it was an oversight, but it just seems odd that this kind of calculation was left after HB3 was done several sessions ago and modify that, because it doesn't tell taxpayers the same thing that it would tell them for your municipal government, right? Because as you just pointed out,
That's true.
$10.7 million would be a substantial reduction below last year. And so I can understand, I guess, from just a pure theoretical, like, let's just leave it in there so people have an idea year over year, but functionally, it doesn't really tell you the same thing that it would tell you for a local government that doesn't have the state balancing
Right.
act.
They just kind of threw us in the bucket with the rest of them.
It's here, so
It's
state
here,
it
so
and respect
it's
it.
here, we'll have to calculate it. That's true. Okay. So tonight, for the general fund, we're gonna propose a balanced budget with revenues at $153,309,901, and the same for expenditures. If my projection works out, that would give us about a $30.8 million fund balance, and leave us right there at the 20% mark, 2.4 months worth of operating.
According to CE local, that's within policy.
Yes, that's still within policy.
We have within policy between 20 and 25% fund balance is the recommendation for us to maintain.
Is there anything projected for maintenance?
Yeah, so we, the 3.17 pennies, we've built into the 6200s for those repairs, and any of that deductible we need to pay or reimburse ourselves for what we've already paid out of this year's budget for that purpose. And then there's $500,000 in there for our capital improvement.
Just as the budget committee, as we met, we went through and we were not at balance without the disaster funds. I think we were still at about a $1.1 million deficit,
Yeah.
but we were, I guess, intentional in that we were like, okay, we'll live with that. But if we do these disaster pennies, we do want to see that put back into 6,200, which, what does that translate to? Is that our contracted services or? what
Yeah,
is that?
that's the contracted services.
So that those
Oh.
disaster pennies are being intentionally budgeted, whatever beyond the deficit may go.
And we can go
towards
back to slide
maintenance.
3. Slide 3 would show that. And so, although this is for this year's 24-25, and 6,200 is where we put those additional funds, assuming you adopt the disaster penny. So again, this is this year's budget, 24-25, this past year's, but that's where those funds would reside, is predominantly in that 6,200, and then some 6,300 for materials that we would have to purchase.
All right, so very quickly, we'll run through debt service. For 24, we've kind of just, for debt service and school nutrition, you're going to be seeing 24-25, and then the proposed for 25-26 altogether. So for debt service, we originally budgeted a $3.4 million surplus. Final amended will come in around 3.8. The state hold harmless is coming in a little more healthier than we anticipated. And so projected, I'm anticipating a $3.7 million surplus for the debt service fund. That would put us at about $16 million. And since we've dropped that INS rate, if we do the bonds pass, that would give us capacity and be able to maintain that rate on any additional debt. For 25-26, we are proposing $26.4 million in revenue. Our principal and interest payments and some bond fees coming in at $25,233,000 for a surplus of 1.171. And most of that surplus is going to be the penalties and interest and investment earnings that's built into that with that lower debt rate.
When you say
Is
penalties
that-
and interest,
Oh, is that how we're buying down the bond debt is from interest? I guess I don't quite understand that. How we,
Yeah, so there is, on the fund balance in there, there's investment earnings that happen on that. There is some, like past,
Delinquent taxes where they're starting to charge penalties and interest. Those don't get captured into the template to determine that. It just, we kind of estimate what those are gonna be based on historical that's built in there.
Should the voters approve the bonds, we would anticipate that we will actually, at least in the near term, have to adopt deficit IMS budgets. Not, we'll still have fund balance in there, but just to maintain that tax rate so that our citizens don't, or residents don't see a big jump in the tax rate as a result of the bond passage. So there's some strategy in reducing, having that fund balance so that we can kind of phase into future debt issues without spiking the tax rate.
so like historically, so we're using some of that fund balance here this year to kind of buy that down, keep the tax rate the same. If we look back into recent past, we have paid some debt off early out of this fund balance. We have refinanced some debt to save about $4 million for the district, well, for the community. Right, so we kind of use it, you can only use it to do those types of things. So, yeah.
And now the state is starting to kind of penalize us on the hold harmless if we start defeasing debt and collecting more than we should to pay our debt service. Start going along with
So if you if you collect more, I would say that you should, but if you collect more and start paying down your debt faster, yeah, the state has said, we're gonna penalize you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's new this year. Seems counterintuitive, but okay.
All right, and then for school nutrition, they adopted nearly a $2 million deficit, $1.9 million. He is trying to spend down his fund balance to be in compliance. After COVID, there was an influx of funding into school nutrition, and everybody's been non-compliant for a few years now and struggling to get that down. So for 24-25, I'm anticipating he'll come in about $1 million deficit. And then he's also going to be proposing a $1.2 million deficit to get him closer to that 3 months operating. So that's intentional for his proposed 25-26 budget.
What is that fund balance supposed to be? Is it supposed to zero out every year for school nutrition?
It
or-
should be 3 months operating, so kind of like we
Okay, so 3
measure.
months?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So he's getting close to it then?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's working towards it. He's fighting his vacancy factor. He's struggling on staffing, and so
Okay.
he's fighting that with the benefits combined with that.
But we can be
so-
penalized at some point if we continue to stay above that level, right? Like,
Could,
we've gotta-
yes.
we've gotta
I
keep it
think,
down.
yeah, I think the TDA has kind of seen that everybody's struggling with that. I think they are starting to move that up a little bit to closer to 4 to 5 months, I believe. I think double
You have
check
to
the
develop
numbers.
a plan in order to.
Yes, yeah, and each year they have to develop a plan and submit it to Texas Department of Agriculture about how you plan on spending down that fund balance.
So, one of the things we're not able to do though is to buy down like our lunch rates, like our meal rates. We can't do that, right? The USDA
Right,
says we can't
right.
do that.
Yeah, they define it, yeah.
Yeah.
I know, it would be awesome if we could, but
All right, so those are gonna be the 3 budgets that we're gonna propose to you tonight, and ask for you to adopt.
Melissa, can you go back to slide 9 for just a second?
Slide 9, sure. Oops. There you go.
Okay, so on our district's website, we have a link to its financial transparency, and we've put videos that we have been putting out to our community. And I just want to go back just a second. If you recall, about a year and a half ago, more than 18 months ago, we were facing a $13 million projected deficit. We lost 50% of our SHARS funding overnight with a letter that we received that year, unexpectedly, like districts across the state. We were dealing with, and are still dealing with, to some degree, the record inflation rates, and as well as some pretty significant gaps in things like safety security funding, even in spite of a safety security allotment. And so I'd really be remiss if I didn't say to get to almost a $13 million reduction in expenditures has been a lot of hard work. I appreciate the board's budget committee that has been giving us good guidance through this process. I appreciate a lot of people in this room who've spent more hours than I can count trying to help solve this challenge that pretty much 80 to 90% of the districts across the state were facing. As well as just teachers and principals and staff who participated on the Budget Advisory Committee. And I appreciated Brandon's comment, without our disaster pennies that will allow us to address absolutely the things we still need to repair from the storm, as well as we spent a lot of money prior to even getting that report on storm damage. We repaired the things that were most obvious to us at the time. But without those disaster pennies, we would be most likely looking at a deficit budget again. And so I just say that our work is not done. We still will continue to look for ways to bring down our expenditures. We knew that. We knew we still need to do that work. That work will continue. But just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's given us governance guidance through that process, but also those who've been working the challenge behind the scenes to look at how we can continue to bring down those expenditures. And so those videos are still there. I actually watched one this morning and am incredibly proud that Melissa's here today and we're presenting a balanced budget, but just wanted to say our work is not finished. We will still continue that work behind the scenes as we already are thinking about the 26-27 budget. So.
yeah, and why are we looking at 26-27, right? Because we know that we're gonna see at least $1 million reduction in our state funding in 26, 27, correct?
When we received the legislative budget board's runs, it looked like the second year of the biennium, we were projected to lose another $1 million. But again, a lot has to happen this year. We're gonna have to see what happens actually with the early ed allotment, what actually happens with, our, special education allotment funding. So we will hopefully know a lot more, as this year progresses and into next summer, but at least on paper, we were projected to get $1 million less, in the second year of the biennium. So we're gonna start thinking and planning through what could that potentially look like. We certainly are hoping that's not the case, but we're gonna plan for worst case scenario if we need to.
Looks like we're pretty tight this year, but is there any way we can build an emergency fund in the future for things like the disasters and things, so that we're not reverting to that sort of a thing? We may not need it in the future if we planned on it. And can we have, $1 million just sitting in an emergency fund? Like, is that?
I think what we're working towards is, and, the board, through the budget assumptions, had us allocate $500,000 in capital projects, and would love to see that actually go up, and I think that would be something we really need to work towards, is increasing that. You can see in looking back, there was a time where we were able to put a little bit more in that account, and just with the way the budget landscape has been, that dollar amount has gotten smaller. But even in spite of that, we've been spending, Mike's gonna quote the dollar amount on, just our maintenance and repair.
Yeah, they're about 1.1 to 1.2 million per year is what they spend out of their budget.
So that 500,000 is above and beyond what we already budget for our maintenance team and our facilities team. And so they do projects out of that budget, and then that extra 500,000 has helped us tremendously. So to answer your question, yes, we want to do that. The other thing we have to think about is, even in this balanced budget scenario, there is no room for future, as it looks right now, for future compensation. So we're gonna have to look at how do we continue to bring down expenditures in order to also be able to stay competitive in the market and compensate our staff. So there is work to do ahead of us. Any other questions, any slides you want us to go back to and talk? Because later this evening, Melissa's going to do an abbreviated version of this presentation. So she'll do that presentation, open up a public hearing for discussion of budget and tax rate. And so just want to, and I think you also heard Melissa say on consent is that budget amendment 11 that we're asking you to take action on this evening as well.
Also want to mention the salaries and benefits that you're seeing here will be netted with that vacancy factor in the public hearing, okay? We always split them out when we're in workshop or in committees, but that will be netted as one number in the board meeting.
Manuel, do you have the verbiage that someone's gonna have to read off?
It's supposed to be on the dice there for you.
Okay, okay. So just that, y'all will know, when we do this one, it's totally different than any other motion that is done. You can't vary from it. I mean, very clear, the law says this is how you will read the motion. And, everybody's gonna vote the way they're gonna vote, but the motions are not, well, I motion we do, no, it's somebody has a piece of paper and they read them off,
Yeah.
so that the public can hear it.
And there'll be two of them.
The second motion is
motions.
statutorily required.
Right.
On two motions for tax rate.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'd like to make a comment, kind of echo what Chris was saying. Of course, Chris, you're on the budget committee, so, you kind of don't shortchange yourself. You did a lot of work on this thing, you and Brandon. And Brandon, I know you've been on this thing for not so long, but man, your comments and your work has been instrumental in driving at this, along with Dr. Gold and Melissa. When I saw this proposed budget, I was relieved. Because was it 18 months ago? 18 months ago, we were sweating it. I was really concerned about what was going to happen. So thank you for the work you've done. And carving out $13 million out of this budget has been a lot of heartache over that, lots of time and effort. So you guys have done a fantastic job. Can't say enough about that. So thank you. Sometimes it's policy committee, sometimes it's facilities, sometimes it's budget, and the budget committee has shined off on this, and I really appreciate the amount of time you guys spent in this. Lots of thinking too went into this process. So thank you.
Next up is the policy committee. They got a lot of stuff coming their way.
Oh, yes.
So there's going to be a part in the next meeting where there's committee reports. You're not going to hear a budget committee report because you just heard the budget committee report. This is what the budget so we won't have anything to say there.
Any other questions or comments?
Are we at the end?
We're at the end, sir.
Oh, okay. All right, well, that concludes our board workshop this evening. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 5:37 p.m.